In the annals of criminal history, certain names evoke a particular sense of dread, their stories serving as stark reminders of the darkness that can reside within the human heart. Long before the term serial killer was ever coined, and far from the gas-lit streets of Victorian London or the sprawling cities of modern America, the sun-drenched island of Jamaica became the backdrop for a truly horrifying series of events. This is the story of Louis Hutchinson, a man whose name is forever etched into the island's folklore as its first documented serial killer. His reign of terror in the mid-18th century was so profoundly shocking that it has been passed down through generations, a chilling tale of a predator who turned a place of supposed safety into a deadly trap for anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. He was known as the Mad Master, a title earned through acts of unimaginable cruelty. The story of Louis Hutchinson is not merely a collection of grim statistics or historical footnotes, it is a narrative that delves into the very nature of evil itself. Operating from a secluded fortress-like home, he preyed upon the vulnerable and the unsuspecting, his motives seemingly rooted in a pure and insatiable thirst for violence. The sheer scale and brutality of his crimes were unprecedented in Jamaica at the time, creating a climate of fear that spread far beyond the hills of St. Anne Parish where he resided. Travelers who were simply passing through, looking for a moment's rest or shelter, would vanish without a trace, their disappearances adding to the growing legend of a malevolent force lurking in the Jamaican countryside, a monster hidden in plain sight. Hutchinson's tale is particularly fascinating because it unfolds in a colonial setting, a world already fraught with its own inherent violence and social complexities. He was a European immigrant who used his position of authority and the isolation of his property to commit heinous acts with impunity for a considerable time. The very landscape that offered him seclusion also served to conceal his crimes, making it difficult for authorities to connect the scattered disappearances to one single, sinister source. His story is a chilling reminder that predators can emerge in any time and any place, their methods adapting to the environment around them, turning idyllic settings into hunting grounds where the unwary become the prey. We must journey back to the 1760s to understand the full scope of his malevolence. This was a time when travel was arduous and often perilous, and the remote parts of Jamaica were sparsely populated, making them ideal for someone wishing to operate outside the immediate reach of the law. Louis Hutchinson exploited this reality to its fullest extent. He was not a phantom who struck in the night and disappeared. He was a landowner, a figure of some local standing, which made his eventual unmasking all the more shocking to the community. His story forces us to confront the unsettling truth that sometimes the greatest monsters are not mythical beasts, but the people who live right alongside us. Louis Hutchinson's journey began far from the tropical warmth of the Caribbean, in the misty highlands of Scotland, where he was born in 1733. Details of his early life are sparse, lost to the passage of time, but it is believed he received some form of medical training, perhaps as a student of medicine or an assistant to a physician. This background, while unconfirmed, adds a particularly sinister layer to his later atrocities, suggesting a clinical detachment and a morbid curiosity about the human body. Whatever the circumstances of his upbringing, Scotland in the mid-18th century was a place of significant social and economic change. And, like many ambitious young men of his era, Hutchinson looked outward for opportunities to make his fortune and establish a new life for himself. The lure of the British colonies was strong, with Jamaica, the jewel of the crown, being a particularly attractive destination. The island's booming sugar economy, built upon the brutal system of enslaved labor, promised immense wealth to European settlers who could acquire land and manage plantations. Sometime in the 1760s, Hutchinson made the fateful decision to leave his homeland behind and immigrate to Jamaica. He arrived not as a destitute adventurer, but as a man with enough means to acquire a significant property. He was seeking not just wealth, but a domain of his own, a place where he could exercise complete control, far from the societal constraints of his native Scotland. Upon his arrival in Jamaica, Hutchinson purchased a large estate in the parish of St. Anne, a region known for its rolling hills, lush vegetation, and relative isolation. The property included a peculiar castle-like structure that would soon become infamous. He named it Edinburgh Castle, a clear nod to his Scottish heritage. But the name would eventually become synonymous not with Scottish pride, but with Jamaican terror. The estate was strategically located along a main road that connected the north and south coasts of the island, a route frequently used by lone travelers, merchants, and soldiers. This location was no accident. It provided Hutchinson with a steady stream of potential victims right at his doorstep. The transition from a young Scotsman with uncertain prospects to a Jamaican landowner marked a pivotal moment in Hutchinson's life. It provided him with the three key ingredients for his future reign of terror, isolation, authority, and opportunity. As the master of Edinburgh Castle, he held power over the enslaved people who worked his land, and his position as a white European landowner afforded him a level of respect and deference from the wider community. This status created a veneer of respectability that would shield him from suspicion for years, allowing the Mad Master to begin his gruesome work under the cover of his newfound colonial privilege and the deceptive tranquility of the Jamaican hills. The heart of Louis Hutchinson's murderous enterprise was his home, Edinburgh Castle. This was not a castle in the grand European sense, with towering spires and majestic fortifications, but rather a formidable stone house built for defense and seclusion. It stood on a hill, offering a commanding view of the surrounding landscape and the vital road that passed nearby. Its thick stone walls, complete with loopholes for firing muskets, gave it the appearance of a small fortress. For any weary traveler seeking refuge from the tropical sun or a safe place to rest for the night, the sight of such a sturdy dwelling, owned by a fellow European, would have seemed like a sanctuary, a beacon of safety in a wild and unfamiliar land. This illusion of safety was Hutchinson's most powerful weapon. He cultivated an image of a hospitable host, welcoming passers-by to his estate. The castle, with its promise of shelter and refreshment, was the bait in his elaborate trap. Once a visitor passed through its gates, they were entering a world entirely under Hutchinson's control, cut off from the outside world by the very isolation that made the property so appealing. The thick walls that seemed to offer protection from external threats were, in reality, designed to contain the horrors within, muffling the sounds of violence and ensuring that the dark secrets of Edinburgh Castle remained hidden from view. Inside the castle, the facade of civility would quickly crumble. The enslaved people on the estate were unwilling witnesses to the true nature of their master. They lived in constant fear, subjected to extreme cruelty and violence that went far beyond the already brutal norms of 18th century slavery. The stories they would later tell painted a picture of a man consumed by a sadistic rage. They spoke of torture, of gruesome experiments, and of a master who seemed to derive immense pleasure from inflicting pain. The castle was not a home, it was a laboratory of horror, and its inhabitants, both enslaved and transient, were at the complete mercy of the Mad Master's whims. The structure itself seemed to conspire with its owner. It was a labyrinth of rooms and cellars, a place where a person could easily be confined, their cries for help lost within the stone confines. The very architecture of Edinburgh Castle facilitated Hutchinson's crimes. It provided the privacy he needed to lure, overpower, and ultimately dispose of his victims without attracting unwanted attention. The estate was a self-contained kingdom of cruelty ruled by a tyrant who had turned his home into an abattoir. The name Edinburgh Castle, once a symbol of his Scottish roots, was forever corrupted, becoming a byword for treachery and death in the heart of Jamaica. Louis Hutchinson did not need to stalk his victims through the wilderness or hunt them in the dead of night. He simply had to wait. His method was one of patient, predatory deception, relying on the natural flow of travelers along the main road that bordered his property. This road was a lifeline for the colony, used by people from all walks of life. Soldiers traveling between barracks, doctors making their rounds, wealthy planters on business, and lone wanderers seeking their fortune. Each person who passed by Edinburgh Castle was a potential target, their journey placing them squarely in the path of a man who viewed them not as fellow humans, but as sport. Hutchinson was an expert marksman, and often took up a position in a tower or window of his castle, rifle in hand, watching the road. He would patiently observe the travelers, selecting his victims with care. He seemed to prefer those who were traveling alone or in small, vulnerable groups. When a suitable target appeared, he would simply shoot them from his perch. It was a cold, calculated act of murder, committed from a distance. The unsuspecting traveler, perhaps pausing to admire the view or rest their horse, would be struck down without ever knowing where the fatal shot came from, their journey ending abruptly and violently on the dusty road below his fortress. For those who were not shot from a distance, Hutchinson employed a more personal and insidious method. He would invite them into his home, playing the part of the gracious host. A traveler might be offered a cool drink, a meal, or a place to sleep for the night. This performance of hospitality was his most chilling tool. It disarmed his victims, lulling them into a false sense of security. Once inside the castle walls, they were completely at his mercy. The transition from welcome guest to captive victim would have been swift and terrifying, the realization of their fatal mistake dawning only when it was far too late to escape the clutches of the Mad Master. After killing his victims, whether by gunshot or by other means within the castle, Hutchinson would have his enslaved workers dispose of the bodies. The remains were often thrown into a deep, natural sinkhole on the property, a gaping maw in the earth that became known as Hutchinson's Hole. This convenient natural feature served as a mass grave, swallowing the evidence of his countless crimes. It is believed that the bodies of dozens of people were discarded in this way, their disappearances becoming mysteries that baffled their families and the colonial authorities for years. The hunt was a continuous cycle of observation, murder and concealment, orchestrated with chilling efficiency. For years, Louis Hutchinson operated with a terrifying degree of freedom, but, such a long and bloody reign of terror couldn't continue forever without raising questions. The first seeds of suspicion were sown by the sheer number of people who went missing in the vicinity of his estate. In a sparsely populated area, the disappearance of even one traveler was a notable event. As the years went by, the frequency of these vanishings became honestly pretty alarming. A doctor who was expected in a nearby town would never arrive. A planter heading to the coast would vanish from the road. These incidents, initially viewed as isolated tragedies, began to form a disturbing pattern, and the common thread was their last known location, the road that passed by Edinburgh Castle. The most potent and persistent rumors came from the people who knew Hutchinson's evil best, the enslaved individuals forced to live and work on his estate. Despite the immense personal danger, whispers of the master's horrific deeds began to seep out into the surrounding communities. These were tales of unspeakable cruelty, not just towards his captured victims, but towards the enslaved workers themselves. They spoke of torture, of bodies being dismembered, and of a master who seemed to, revel in bloodshed. One of the most gruesome and enduring rumors was that Hutchinson was a cannibal who drank the blood of his victims, a practice that earned him the moniker of a human vampire in local folklore. These stories, while terrifying, were often dismissed by the colonial authorities. In the rigid social hierarchy of 18th century Jamaica, the word of an enslaved person held little to no weight against that of a white landowner. Hutchinson's status, wealth, and European heritage provided him with a powerful shield of credibility. Any complaints or accusations from his enslaved workers were likely ignored or treated as falsehoods or exaggerations. This societal prejudice allowed Hutchinson to continue his murderous activities long after his reputation had soured among the local population, who increasingly feared the Mad Master and the sinister castle he inhabited. Despite the official indifference, public opinion began to turn decisively against him. Travelers started to avoid the road near Edinburgh Castle, taking longer, more difficult routes to bypass the dreaded estate. The name Hutchinson became associated with danger and dark rumor. People in the local markets and taverns would speak in hushed tones about the strange and reclusive master of the castle. While there was no concrete proof to connect him directly to the disappearances, the weight of circumstantial evidence and the sheer volume of frightening stories created an aura of menace around him. Hutchinson was becoming a pariah, a monster in the popular imagination, long before the law was ready to act. The web of impunity that had protected Louis Hutchinson for so long finally began to unravel because of one brave man's actions. The catalyst for his downfall was not a wealthy planter or a high-ranking official, but a young English soldier named John Callender. In the early 1770s, Callender was passing through St. Anne and, for reasons that remain unclear, decided he needed to apprehend Hutchinson. It is possible he was acting on the growing tide of public suspicion, or perhaps he had witnessed something himself that convinced him of Hutchinson's guilt. Whatever his motivation, Callender decided to take matters into his own hands and confront the Mad Master directly. Knowing the dangers involved and the fortress-like nature of Edinburgh Castle, Callender did not go alone. He gathered a small group of companions to assist him in his attempt to arrest the notorious landowner. This was an incredibly bold and perilous move. They were essentially a small civilian posse attempting to take on a man who was known for his skill with firearms and his violent temper on his own heavily defended territory. As they approached the estate, they were stepping into the lion's den, fully aware that Hutchinson would not be taken without a fight. Their mission was to bring a monster to justice, and they knew the risks were immense. As Callender and his party attempted to enter the property and serve their makeshift warrant, Hutchinson reacted exactly as one might expect. Seeing the men approach, he did not wait for questions or negotiations. From his fortified position within the castle, he opened fire on them. His aim was deadly and true. During the ensuing confrontation, Hutchinson shot and killed John Callender. This single act, committed in brazen defiance of would-be lawmen, was the fatal mistake that would seal his fate. By killing a white British soldier, Hutchinson had finally crossed a line that the colonial authorities could not ignore. The murder of John Callender transformed the situation entirely. Hutchinson was no longer just the subject of dark rumors and local suspicion. He was now a wanted fugitive for the murder of a representative of the Crown. The death of a soldier was an attack on British authority itself, and it prompted an immediate and decisive response from the colonial government. A warrant was officially issued for his arrest, and a detachment of soldiers from the Royal Navy was dispatched to capture him. The Mad Master's secluded kingdom of terror was about to be invaded by a force he could not possibly repel. His final violent act had triggered the very response he had managed to avoid for so long. With the full weight of the British military now bearing down on him, Lewis Hutchinson knew his time at Edinburgh Castle was over. He could not hope to withstand a siege by trained soldiers. Realizing his capture was inevitable if he remained, he fled his fortress of horror and attempted to escape the island. He made his way to the coast, securing passage on a ship sailing from Old Harbor. His plan was to disappear, to leave Jamaica and the trail of bodies behind him, and perhaps start anew somewhere else. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the Mad Master might actually slip through the grasp of justice and escape retribution for his years of slaughter. However, the Royal Navy was resolute. Admiral George Rodney, a prominent figure in the British Naval Command, personally took charge of the manhunt. Naval vessels were dispatched to patrol the waters around Jamaica, effectively blockading the island and cutting off potential escape routes. Hutchinson's ship was intercepted at sea by one of these patrols. A boarding party stormed the vessel, and the notorious killer was finally captured. There was no dramatic last stand, no final shootout on the high seas. Lewis Hutchinson, the terrifying predator of the Jamaican hills, was taken into custody without a fight, his desperate bid for freedom thwarted by the very naval power that underpinned the British colony. Once Hutchinson was securely in custody, the authorities were finally able to conduct a thorough search of Edinburgh Castle. What they found inside confirmed the most terrifying whispers and exceeded their worst fears. The property was a veritable house of horrors. Scattered throughout the castle and its grounds were the personal effects of countless missing persons, clothing, watches, saddles, and other belongings that served as grim trophies of his victims. The sheer volume of these items pointed to a scale of killing that was almost incomprehensible. It was a museum of murder, each object telling a silent story of a life cut short. The most shocking discovery of all was the sinkhole known as Hutchinson's Hole. When authorities peered into its depths, they found it was filled with the skeletal remains of human beings. The pit was a mass grave containing the bodies of his many victims, discarded like rubbish. While an exact count was impossible, contemporary accounts suggest that the remains of at least 40 individuals were identified within the sinkhole and around the property. The gruesome scene at Edinburgh Castle provided undeniable physical proof of the horrors that had transpired there, cementing Lewis Hutchinson's legacy as one of the most prolific and sadistic killers in the history of the Americas. With Lewis Hutchinson in chains and the horrifying evidence from his castle laid bare, the stage was set for one of the most sensational trials in Jamaican history. He was transported to Spanish Town, which was the island's capital at the time, to face justice. The trial was a major public event, drawing massive crowds and capturing the attention of the entire colony. For years, the people of Jamaica had lived with the frightening stories and unsettling disappearances surrounding Edinburgh Castle. Now, they would finally see the man at the center of it all held to account for his crimes in a court of law. The trial itself was swift. The evidence against Hutchinson was overwhelming and irrefutable. There were the testimonies of his formerly enslaved workers who could now speak freely about the atrocities they had witnessed. There was the mountain of physical evidence recovered from his estate, the stolen belongings of his many victims that directly linked him to their disappearances, Most damning of all, however, was the crime that led to his capture, the murder of the soldier, John Calendar. While he was suspected of dozens of murders, it was for this single, provable act that he was primarily tried and convicted. The legal system focused on the charge that was easiest to prove beyond any doubt. Throughout the proceedings, Hutchinson reportedly showed little remorse for his actions. He was found guilty of the murder of John Calendar and sentenced to death by hanging. The verdict was met with a sense of relief and grim satisfaction across the island. The reign of the Mad Master was officially over. On the morning of March 16, 1773, Louis Hutchinson was taken to the public gallows in Spanish Town Square. A large crowd gathered to witness the execution, a grim but necessary final chapter in a story that had haunted them for so long. His execution was a public spectacle, intended to serve as a powerful message that no one, regardless of their status or background, was above the law. As he was hanged, a chapter of Jamaican history closed. The man who had turned a stretch of the island's beautiful countryside into his personal killing field had paid the ultimate price for his crimes. The execution brought an end to the life of the killer, but it did not erase the memory of his deeds. The story of what he had done would live on, becoming a permanent part of the island's cultural memory and a cautionary tale for generations to come. The execution of Louis Hutchinson brought an end to his physical threat, but his story has cast a long and dark shadow over Jamaican history and folklore. He is remembered not just as a criminal, but as an almost mythical figure of evil, his deeds blurring the line between historical fact and legend. The ruins of his home, Edinburgh Castle, still stand today. Though they are now overgrown with vegetation, they serve as a haunting physical reminder of his reign of terror, a place that locals still regard with a mixture of fear and fascination. The site, along with the infamous Hutchinson's Hole, has become a landmark of dark tourism, drawing the curious and the brave to the scene of his unspeakable crimes. Hutchinson's case is historically significant as it provides one of the earliest and most detailed records of a serial predator in the Western Hemisphere. His methods, luring victims to an isolated location under a guise of hospitality, and his apparent motivation, killing for sport or sadistic pleasure, are chillingly modern in their psychology. He existed long before criminal profiling and forensic science, yet his pattern of behavior fits the archetype of the serial killer that would become all too familiar in the centuries that followed. His story is a vital, if grim, part of the history of criminology, a case study of extreme pathology in a pre-industrial world. In Jamaican culture, the tale of Louis Hutchinson has evolved into a powerful cautionary narrative. It is a story told to children to warn them about the dangers of trusting strangers and the reality that evil can wear a friendly face. The more lurid details of his crimes, such as the rumor that he drank his victim's blood, have cemented his place in folklore as a kind of real-life monster, a white witch of the hills. His story has been passed down through oral tradition, songs, and literature, ensuring that the memory of the Mad Master and the terror he inflicted will not be forgotten. He represents the ultimate betrayal, the host who murders his guest. Today, as we reflect on the chilling tale of Jamaica's first serial killer, it serves as more than just a gruesome piece of history. It is a profound commentary on the abuse of power, the vulnerability of the isolated, and the societal structures that can allow evil to flourish in plain sight. Louis Hutchinson exploited his position of privilege as a white landowner in a slave society to commit atrocities with impunity for years. His story is a stark reminder that the capacity for extreme violence is not confined to any single era or place, and that the vigilance of a community and the courage of individuals are often the only barriers that stand between order and chaos.